Hello, my name is Patricio Urias Medina, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the research I did regarding the high suicide rates and life-threatening behaviors amongst the trans community. As society keeps moving forward and advancing, so does our understanding and acceptance of certain groups of people who've been discriminated against all throughout history. Right now, there's a large social justice movement which looks to normalize and be more accepting of trans people, with many trans activists talking about their struggles with mental health and how they can be attributed to society's poor treatment towards them. This research will try and take a look at our society and what's their position on the matter and how much they actually know. The hypothesis for this research is, if the suicide rates amongst the trans community are so high, then there must be a relationship between this community and a poor mental state which may be caused by a myriad of circumstances. The general objective of this research is to study the root causes of the high suicide rates and life-threatening behaviors that exist in the trans youth, and how it all relates to mental health. And the specific objectives is to learn more about trans people and their perspective on the matter, and to understand the relationship between a person's mental state and their environment. Trans people, for the most part, are not taken into consideration in what can be considered mainstream society, and whenever the topic comes up, people generally disregard it as a trend. People looking for attention or view them as social outcasts, when in reality, trans people are more common than what they might seem at first. According to a study done by the US National Institute of Health's National Library of Medicine in 2016, 390 out of 100,000 people in the United States identified themselves as transgender, which may seem few at first, but considering that the US had a population of 323.1 million people in 2016, the numbers suddenly grow, and now we have a population of over a million trans people living in the US alone. Now that we've established that trans people are not an oddity and are quite common, it should be an extremely alarming fact that according to the Canadian Centre for Suicide Prevention, 22 to 44% of transgender people have attempted suicide at some point in their life. Over 10% of trans people report attempting to commit suicide recently within the previous year. 2 out of 3 trans people report performing self-harm recently within the previous year. Trans people are twice as likely to think about suicide. Knowing all these facts make many questions start to appear, such as why are trans people more susceptible to these things? What is the reason behind most of these conditions, and if they have all a common single source or multiple ones? Gender and sex are two distinctly different subjects which tend to get mixed up and are assumed to be the same. This can often be attributed to a lack of education regarding this subject, but to summarize, sex, according to the Canadian Institute of Health and Research, can be defined as: sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and function, and reproductive and sexual anatomy. Sex is usually categorized as female or male, but there is a variation in biological attributes to comprise sex and how the attributes are expressed. Meanwhile, gender is defined as: gender refers to a socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender-diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they act and interact, the distribution of power and resources in society. Gender identity is not confined to a binary, nor is it static. It exists along a continuum and can change over time. People tend to use the word sex and gender interchangeably, when this is not correct. Generally, a child's sex is assigned as either male or female depending on their genitals. Then the child gender is assumed. For many, this is of little concern because the sex they were assigned at birth coincides with their gender identity, expression, and many of the social assumptions and ideas that come with that gender. Although gender may begin with the sex you were assigned at birth, it consists of a complex relationship between body, identity, and social gender. The way someone may associate with their gender can be divided into many different categories. The two most common are cisgender and transgender people. Cisgender people are the ones whose gender is paired with their sex, whilst a trans person's gender identity is not the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. The word transgender is an umbrella term that originally was exclusively used to refer to males and females who respectively identified as female and male. Later on, the term became broader and it came to include non-binary people. What many trans people try to achieve is a gender congruence, which can be defined as the feeling of tranquility and harmony with one's gender. To achieve this, the people that surround them must treat them as the gender they perceive themselves as. The research level is a level 3 descriptive study. The research design is descriptive, conclusive, and single cross-sectional one. The population is people from around the world from the ages of 15 onwards. The sample of population is 72. The experimental design is: Number 1. The subject that is going to be studied is researched and better understood. Number 2. A survey is formulated to test the knowledge of the subjects as well as to understand how good or bad the situation is. Number 3. Some changes are done to the survey. Number 4. The survey is applied. Number 5. The data retrieved. The following table shows the materials and equipment used for the experiment. The data collection technique is a survey made by Google Forms. The data processing and analysis technique, the data gathered from the Google Forms is going to be taken automatically to an Excel spreadsheet. There were 72 surveys applied, all of which were fully answered. The following table shows the demographic to which the surveys were applied to.
It's paradise since the first time I saw you standing there.
The survey consisted of 17 questions, 3 of which asked information about the person answering the survey. From the remaining 14, 11 were closed questions. The following pie charts represent the answers people gave to each question.
Come on, let's dance. You know it's only rock and roll.
The remaining 3 open-ended questions asked things related to previous questions asked, such as mentioning any trans or non-binary public figure in the case that you knew any, as well as asking why do people think trans people are twice as likely to commit suicide. Since the survey was largely answered by people who were amongst the age range of 15 to 19 and were from a similar higher-end socio-economic background, they are expected to be more educated about the subject, which in average they were, but of course there were some outliers. People that were 49 to 60 and over tended to know less about the subject, and they gave less educated answers. This could be attributed to less information about the subject being around them, as well as the way they were educated about the subject, like gender, back when they were just children. From this research, we were able to make many assumptions. In general, people were more informed about the topic than what it was originally thought. Sadly, people who were older than 49 tended to fall into the not-uncommon stereotype of old people being conservative. We can assume this to be due to their education and the way they were raised and educated about topic as gender. And it really comes to show how society in general has progressed and how it has become more open-minded in just a few years. It can be assumed that on average, the people who answered the survey had a superficial understanding of what it really means to be a trans person. Proof of this is them knowing what the term trans refers to while not knowing what the term cis is. People from the US also tended to have a greater and a more on-hand understanding of what it means to be trans. We could attribute this to how in the US and in wealthier countries in general, there's a larger trans activist movement as well as it being more normalized. Also, teenagers were the ones who held the most open-minded beliefs and were the most accepting. This could be due to how social media helps to shed a light on certain people's struggles, such as trans people. Social media has also helped to normalize and be more inclusive to trans and non-binary people. And since teenagers and young adults are the ones who mostly use them and better know how to navigate them, it's no surprise that they are the ones who could be more accepting of trans people.